Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is the High Caliber Man podcast. Back in space again, one more time, just to drop something very short um, and brief. I wanted to talk about Stoic philosophy, and I'll be doing a lot more. I intend to do a lot more or have a lot more conversations and dialogues with some of my friends from the professional world and from the media related to philosophy, modern day philosophy, but based on the ideas of the ancients. But Stoic philosophy is Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, etc., etc., etc. I got no notes in front of me, no references, but those are two very, very key names. And in fact, in the field of psychotherapy, we know of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. But before there was cognitive behavior therapy, there was rational emotive therapy, and which subsequently evolved into rational emotive behavior psychotherapy. And it was brought about by a gentleman by the name of Albert Ellis, Dr. Albert Ellis, and he took a large chunk of what is known as Stoic philosophy and converted it into and he converted it into a field of psychotherapy, like a kind of very active, directive, very teaching modality type of psychotherapy. So helping the client, the person to see insights of where their thinking is causing them emotional disturbance. And it's based on the idea of Epictetus, who says it's not events in and of themselves that cause the emotional distress, right? It's not the events, it's not the external events, but it's the person's evaluation of how the person looks, their perspective, their view on those events, of how they internalize that in their thoughts. It will lead to emotional disturbance, right? And so that's the basis of what Epictetus said. And Albert Ellis was able to, read through these classics and just evolve and devise a whole school of therapy based on that psychological, clinical psychology counseling from that big chunk of Stoic philosophy. So I just want to drop a few Stoic points, principles. It's a large body of work, but I just want to drop a few as a kind of an introduction for those of you who are not familiar. But just to get your thinking cap on, because it does make you reflect on, is that external event that I was so upset about, it hasn't changed, but how is it that at one point we find ourselves so emotionally distressed when something happens, but over a period of time, the event hasn't changed, it's happened, it's been happened, right? But we seem less affected negatively. Or sometimes it could be quite the opposite, that something's happened ages ago and you're holding on to it from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, internalized it until it becomes part of your identity, right? And you can't let go and can't move past this event. So it's or series of events, right? So it's very much about, how we maneuver ourselves and our attitudes that we choose to have, right? That's why they use that phrase in rational emotive behavior therapy. You make yourself disturbed. They never say, what was it that upset you? They, the phrase, the kind of terminology is like, what is it that you're doing that's making yourself, right? So taking responsibility, taking ownership of your emotional disturbance. That doesn't mean something negative external doesn't happen, right? We have negative emotions, but in that school of psychotherapy, there's healthy negative emotions and there's unhealthy negative emotions, right? You could be sad, right? Because you lost your job. And that sad might mean, you feel low in mood. You feel you see it as very unfortunate. You wish that this wasn't the case. But when you look at the future, you see the possibility of things can be better and there is a way of overcoming this obstacle. But the unhealthy emotion will be depression, where you feel helpless, hopeless, and in despair and see no future and don't see yourself as having the skills to overcome this problem. And then that's the difference. They're both negative emotions. Nobody wants to be sad, right? But in that context or with those definitions, better to be sad than depressed, right? It's a healthy response. Sad is then a healthy response to a negative set of circumstances. Yeah, but you can move past it. So a little bit about Stoic philosophy, or just a few bullet points about Stoic philosophy, right? The keys to success is not outside somewhere in the world. They're locked up in your mind. So sometimes we search and we search and we search for answers, but it's better to introspect and reflect because the genius, the brilliance, the solutions to so much of the challenges that we face are in our own mind already, right? They're in our own minds already, right? You already have the resources to change your life, right? And you already have the strength and the energy. Whether you choose to implement that, whether that feels uncomfortable to implement that, and because we're so used to being in our comfort zones, we make a choice whether or not to implement that. Or sometimes we feel sorry for ourselves and we think it shouldn't be this hard. Who said it shouldn't be this hard? How hard should it be? Why should it be pain free or inconvenience free or, you know, uh, warm and fuzzy feeling giving to accomplish your goal? No, it might be that your goal requires struggle and discomfort and, speaking to people or reading resources or making journeys or doing things that you really don't want to do. But big picture, if you execute, it will bring you the positive outcome that you want and that you need. Yeah. And life is not a matter of holding good cards, right? But about playing a poor hand well. Yeah. That is the nature of this human journey that we're on. You know, some of the biggest movers and shakers or influencers, only, and I'm not going to use it in a modern context of people who go on YouTube, but people whose ideas and physical presence, right, has moved civilizations and had the biggest impact on the human race. Many of those individuals came from very what we would consider in a modern world very, very tough origin. They had very, very tough origin stories, like they were orphans or grew up in war-torn civilizations or born into being occupied by a external colonial force, born into Epictetus, for example, whose ideas have really influenced the world of philosophy and modern Western civilization. He was a slave who had been hobbled. He had been hobbled by his master so that he couldn't run away. He wasn't even in chains and shackles. He wasn't even on a plantation so that one day he could possibly escape. He was done in, done up, so he couldn't escape. And he was a part of that gave him the inspiration to use his mind to overcome. And I think that he ended up being freed because he developed these psychological ideas. I'm saying psychological ideas, right? I'm modern, right? But he developed these philosophical ideas and his master was quite impressed and used to allow him to go out and teach and teach and teach and people would listen to him and he kind of built up a following. And so he came from a tough that was a tough that wasn't a cakewalk, that wasn't a cakewalk, he wasn't born disabled, he was, maimed so that he couldn't escape. But still, he was able to use the power of his mind, the power of thought, power of reason to overcome his physical set of circumstances and not to be dominated by it. So, just want to touch base. I'm going to be coming back, God willing, hitting hard with some ideas from Stoic philosophy, but more putting it in the context of where we're at as a society, where we're at as a community, and some of the challenges that we face. And maybe there may be a silver bullet. By changing our thinking, we could change the way that we feel, change the way that we feel, we could change the way that we behave and have some different outcomes. So I promise I wouldn't hold you. So till next time, remember to stay safe. Peace.